this exhibition? Make some noise if you're feeling it. That's right, let's get some vibes in the room. We've got some legends in the building tonight. On this panel right now, I got some legends with me. Got my man Ernie Beckmann, historian, sneakers. We've got freelance photographer, collector of sneakers, Julia, aka Sneakerqueen. And we've got my man Felix, editor, Hypebeast. It's like I said, we've got three legends right here, right now. We're going to talk about something that we all love. It's all about street culture that we're going to be discussing, our favorite sneakers and everything else and so forth. And I just want to say, like, this exhibition is actually mind-blowing. It's my first time being here right now, so I've been blown away. There's a lot of warmth in this place. There's things that take me back. I never thought we'd see anything like this. I'd never thought we'd see one of these establishments celebrating graphs, sneakers, things that we've all grown up with, things that have helped us get through life that little bit more day by day. So this is a real beautiful experience, a real beautiful moment, and we're going to talk about some dope things tonight. So let's get it cracking. Ernie, let's take it back to the 80s. What made the Adidas Rivalry such a great basketball shoe?
The Rivalry wasn't actually the main Adidas basketball shoe. The Rivalry is more like a cultural legend, I would say, instead of such a good basketball shoe. Of course, it is a great basketball, or was a great basketball shoe back then, but the main pair was the Adidas Conductor. They were both part of the Ewing collection, and the Adidas Conductor was a high-top performance shoe with lots of technology built inside the shoe. It was top-notch. It was the most expensive pair on the market at that time. We had to pay almost 300 Deutschmarks back then. It actually came out in 1986, but I was 12 years old at that time. I couldn't afford that pair, and I probably have seen it a few years later, maybe in '88. And we were totally into basketball, and we saw pictures of basketball players from Germany and from Europe. Not the NBA, because there were no magazines or anything at that time, but on almost every page of those magazines, basketball players were wearing the Adidas Conductor, and somehow we thought it must be the best shoe in the world, and we wanted to have that shoe so much. It was just that everyone who was a professional was wearing that shoe. Plus, at that time, I was a metalhead, listening to heavy metal, thrash metal, and Anthrax made an EP. Some of you might know the thrash metal band Anthrax. They made an EP called I'm the Man, and on that cover, three people were wearing the Adidas Conductor, and one of them was wearing the Rivalry. So it wasn't only basketball players, but also the cultural this cultural perspective came into it, because my favorite band, or one of my favorite bands, was wearing the Conductor and the Rivalry, which is also part of the Ewing collection. And so it is more the personal connection to the shoe that makes it such a great basketball shoe for me.
Wow, that's crazy. That's crazy. Julia, why is it so many sporting shoes end up becoming cultural sensations outside of the sports that they may have been originally designed for?
Well, I think since the 90s, basketball and all the sports that led to, or that produced shoes that became cultural icons, were also played on the streets. Street basketball was a big thing in the US. And I think that the fact that all these sports were also part of a community led to the fact that these community, of course, also cultivated their own culture around that. And therefore, I think most of these models, or the star models at least, were kind of trickling down in the culture from the professional basketball players to musicians and other celebrities wearing those shoes. And then us as kids in the 80s and 90s watching these celebrities, whether it's sports or music celebrities, watching them wearing these shoes and giving these shoes a new meaning by wearing them on stage or wearing them in other situation than sports context, makes them move over to being a cultural icon. Nice.
Felix, so I'm saying, we see these shoes, right? Do you think sometimes that, you know, a shoe that may be made for basketball, do you think sometimes they're made with the intention to do more outside of just being on a hardwood in a sports arena?
Great question. I think the shoes are, I mean, Adidas launched their equipment line in, 91? And it was called equipment for a reason. It's because they're tools, they're created for a purpose. And I think a lot of shoes that transcend like the court and make it to the streets, that's a very happy byproduct of good performance-based footwear, or like tools that a brand is creating for athletes. And I think the reason for that is because, you know, if you're talking about like humanity, yeah, you might not be into sneakers, but you're into sports whether you know it or not, because you start running at 3 years old, you start throwing a ball at 3.5, or whatever it is, you're doing sports. It's like a connective red thread that is so intrinsic to our nature. So whether you're a sneakerhead or you just like, you know, buy whatever, you know, buy a pair of like, you know, off the shelf, whatever, you're into sports. It's a connectivity thing. So like you're always gonna find that transcendence from like, you know, an athletic shoe to like a cultural icon, if that's kind of making sense.
A question for the crowd, right? And answer it collectively, not one by one. Can any of you guys imagine Run DMC without the 3 stripes? Not at all, right? It's like your earliest memories of Run DMC, any album cover, any single cover is... I was raised on hip hop, but I was raised on Adidas through Run DMC as well. Guys, how important is the relationship between Adidas and hip hop culture?
I would say essential. That deal was groundbreaking for anything that would come afterwards. It was the first deal for $1 million that was made with a music group. And we have to say, we're not talking about a rock group here. Rock was big at that time. We're talking about a hip hop group coming up and just getting their foot in the door. And a big label from overseas actually recognizing that and investing into that culture on a level where you actually can see it's a little bit, for me, it's a little bit similar to this exhibition. Somebody from totally outside investing in a culture and trying to show the world what the real worth of that culture and of that art that these people are making. And vice versa, these artists elevating the design of people like Jacques Chassin or a brand like Adidas, elevating it to a total different level by putting it in a different context was absolutely groundbreaking, and everything we have about sneaker culture today is based on that, basically.
50 years on, hip hop, you know, it's 50 years old this year. The Superstar, 50 years on, is still popping, it's still going strong. Why is that?
It's a piece of art, man. Like, have you seen the shoe? It's so unlike anything else, even today. Like, it's so unique. It's such a beautifully sculpted, like, structure. It's like, look at the shell toe. Yeah, it's based on a basketball, but it's just such a beautiful object that it is, you know, it's timeless. And I think, you know, we're talking about shoes as equipment and as being tools for an athlete. They can be 2 things at once, right? So that shoe obviously served a purpose, and then it kind of stopped serving a purpose when I mean, who balls in Superstars today? If you do, I rate you. You probably ain't gonna have, you know, too long on the court because they're not very comfortable to ball in. But, you know, eventually when they kind of transcended their purpose, they stayed on as kind of cultural icons because they're just, it's a beautiful, beautiful product.
Can I add something to that? So when the Superstar first released, it's from a German brand, and when it first released, I was not born yet in the 60s, but by the time the Superstar kind of got more mainstream, I would say, in the 80s, it wasn't actually a shoe that was really accepted. Also, the Superstar was produced for the American market, for the basketball market. As you know, basketball wasn't very big in Germany at that time. Soccer was big and running, but basketball wasn't. And so when the shoe was introduced to the masses in Germany, the general reaction to it was actually they look like clown shoes and they are not really a good design. So this shoe really had to establish itself on one point, because the shoe really is, like you said, a design icon, because form follows function in this shoe, and this simple rule is a great formula to greatness, and we can see it in the Superstar. And I think this is part of why it has become such an icon, because for one, it was a basketball leather shoe for that time, the first shoe that actually protected your toe box for the game, so a very functional feature. But this functional feature was so distinctive and so unusual for that time that it really turned heads. And I think to become a cultural icon, turning heads is part of that, and that's what the Superstar achieved.
So Ernie, like as I was saying, you was a fan of Artefact, and there's other artists like Beastie Boys, Eazy E, Missy Elliott. Is there any icons that have inspired you to pick up some kicks?
Yeah, you mentioned already the Beastie Boys. They made me want the campus so bad. It was it was too early for me when they first came out. Yeah, they came out before I realized that shoes are great. So it took a while until I found out that the Campus is a great looking shoe. It came out sometime in 92. It took me until then to realize that the Campus is a great shoe, and I wanted it so much back then. Yeah, that's probably the shoe. Besides the Rivalry and the Conductor from the Anthrax cover, plus basketball pictures I saw in that magazine I was talking about. So yeah, definitely the Campus.
Okay. What about yourself, Julia?
I think nowadays we all know that celebrities influence our shopping experience. Just the fact that influencers nowadays, we actually have a word for it, creating hype. Back then it wasn't named like that, but of course back then people created hype, and for me it was the flashier the better. So I was a fan of LL Cool J and was looking at the outfits, and I think what was extraordinary about these bands or artists was that they didn't only rock a Rivalry, for example, or the Beastie Boys didn't only rock Campus, they did the whole outfit. So it was actually their stage outfit was a statement, which is a look back at New York City Breakers actually coming out in an outfit for their stage, for their show, coordinating themselves. And this is why we actually talk nowadays about hip-hop uniforms or hip-hop clothing styles, because these people defined it. And nowadays this effect is still, I still feel that effect, so it hasn't faded yet.
Okay. And what about yourself, Felix?
To be honest, not really with like musicians or celebrities, but I guess
what, Stormzy didn't inspire you to get the tracksuit out again?
You know what, it's like the evolution of that though, because like I got into trainers when I was about 15, and like my kind of first foray into that world, that subculture, was like through internet forums. So like pre-social, when who remembers Crooked Times. So it was like those OGs like Gary Warnett, who became a really good close personal friend of mine, was like someone I used to like look up to, and like Chris Law, seeing them talking about trainers and what they were interested in, and kind of like, I had no money back when I was 14, 15. And people lining up at Foot Patrol at the old St. Anne's place, I would consume that. I would see pictures and read about all these shoes that they were into, and that's kind of where I got inspired from. But those guys got inspired by your Run DMCs and your Beastie Boys, etc. So kind of like the evolution of it. Do you know what I mean? It's the same thing.
But you still see it today with Bad Bunny or Travis Scott or whatever, so the effect is still there.
Yeah. I mean, it's rare though that I haven't, me personally, my head hasn't turned to a new sneaker without some kind of link to music or some kind of artist endorsement. is it essential, that connection between music and sneakers, and more so definitely with hip hop? Like hip hop, you know, is possibly the most influential.
Nah, for me it's not essential. For me it's the feeling I was talking about before, the feeling that I had when I was playing basketball as a teenager, as a young teenager, the camaraderie in my team, in my club, everything that was, or everything that surrounded those days. My love for sneakers is pretty much focused on the mid to late 80s, maybe early 90s. Stops. We were just talking about it. 92 is probably the year that everything stopped somehow.
Changed.
Yeah, and it's this feeling that that I associate with those sneakers that I'm buying today. All the retros. I'm strictly basketball, maybe a few tennis silhouettes, the big heroes back then, Stefan Edberg, Ivan Lendl, maybe Boris Becker, who was not at Adidas, but it's strictly basketball, and it's this feeling that that I want to think of today.
Felix, you're at Hypebeast. You know, it's actually a word to describe people. Hypebeasts now, it's like that. Like, and it shows the impact of what you guys do on the site and the brand and everything. From your perspective, as someone who sees all kinds of fashion come and go, in and out, or reoccur, is hip hop still as influential now as it was back then? And all these different elements to make up hip hop, be it, you know, the dance element or the music, the rap element, or, you know, the graph side of things.
I mean, yes and no. Like, a lot of the music you hear today, like I would question if it is really hip hop. But we're not going to get into that conversation. But it's still, again, it's like hip hop's evolved, rap's evolved, music's evolved, and you've got, like, you know, today's rappers are absolutely influencing culture. Are they influencing culture in the same way as like your Run DMCs and your Beastie Boys and all the kind of OG hip hop artists? Not in the same way, in different ways. But again, like sports, music is one of those things that's just so organic to us as people. Like, everybody likes music. I've never met a single person who doesn't like music. We don't all like the same music, but we all love music. It's just part of like our nature. So there's always going to be that connectivity between, you know, music and things that we want to consume culturally, and like whether it's fashion, shoes, style, whatever it is, it's always going to be there. So yeah, it's still important.
Okay. Julia, Ernie, if you was told you can only have one pair of Adidas basketball kicks, like, what would it have to be if you could only choose one?
You let me go first. It's all or nothing. There's no in between. I'm sorry, I'm a collector, and my archival heart and my collector's heart is spread across a wide range of designs, and there's no. If you ask me for one basketball model, I couldn't tell you because there's just too many. I love the Conductor, I love Status One, I love the Rivalry. These are all shoes that are, to me, iconic, and it's impossible to choose.
How many pairs of shoes do you have?
That's also hard to answer.
Roughly.
I haven't counted for 10 years plus, but I would estimate maybe above 1,000 pairs.
Wow. What about yourself, Ernie?
So for me, it's probably split. I know I can only choose one. Some of you who follow my Instagram account know that I got a Rivalry high in 2019. I was gifted from Adidas. It is a one of one. That was it was just produced for me. It has my name on the tongue. That was because I lent my OG Rivalries to the people in Portland to rebuild it, and that was like their thank you. So this has to be the pair which I want to keep. But if you ask me for like another pair that probably is important to me, that it would be the Conductor, as Julia already said.
And how many pairs of shoes would you estimate?
About maybe 300 to 400, something in between, maybe a little more. I'm not sure.
Okay. All right, guys, we're close to wrapping this up. I just want to know, like, you know, this year is the 50th anniversary of hip hop, and we're talking about a lot of different shoes. You know, we talked about the Rivalry, we talked about the Conductor. Wishful thinking. Let's say we can do the 100-year anniversary, and let's say we get our AI implants, our body enhancements, and we make it to 100. What shoes do you think they'll be talking about 50 years from now? Or if someone else, whoever does this panel or panels like this?
It's a question if we're going to move in 50 years at all, or if we're all just going to be sitting in front of our computers.
Yeah. But even then, like, what kicks do you think people will be looking back at and being like, yo, these will still stand the test of time 50 years from now?
I think classics are going to stay classics. It doesn't matter how much time will pass. I think iconic sneakers will stay sneakers, but what the new sneakers are going to look like, it's hard to tell.
Let's leave that there, man. Guys, thank you very much. Thank you to Adidas Originals, Saatchi and Saatchi for putting this together. And thank you to yourselves. Thank you.
Thanks for having us.